All right, guys. So now we're gonna practice evaluating the functions whenever we're given either the domain or the range. Sorry, I can't talk. All right. So let's see. It says evaluate the functions using the domain. Well, what is domain? Domain is x, right? So they're telling us that these are all x values. Now, if we look at our problem number 1, it says f of x is equal to 2x plus 4. So what this means, that means that our domain is our input, okay? Our domain is our input. In other words, our x is our input. So if I'm going to do the first one, I'm going to do f. Instead of putting x, this is x, okay? I know what x is, so I'm going to put -3. Is equal to, everywhere I see an x, I'm going to plug in -3 because that is my input. So 2 parentheses, put a parentheses around your x values. -3 plus 4. So what is f of -3? Well, what's 2 times -3? Well, that's -6. What is -6 plus 4? That's -2. And you're done. That's it. All you're doing here is plugging in your input to find your output. The output is your f of x. Do you guys remember what f of x is? Well, that is your y, or that is also your range. All right? Now let's go ahead and do the other one. So now let's do -2. So we're going to do f of -2 because now I'm not putting the x. I know what x is. They want me to find the f of -2. So that is my input. I'm going to put that inside the parentheses. Think about this. Inside parentheses, input, okay? So now 2 parentheses, everywhere you see an x, I'm not going to plug in this x anymore. I'm going to plug in that -2. -2 plus 4. So now I have f of -2. What is 2 times -2? Well, that is -4. And what's -4 plus 4? Well, that's just 0. All right. Now let's go ahead and do the next one. The next one is 0. So I have f. What's my input? I'm not going to put x anymore because I know what the x is. The x is 0. So I'm going to put 0 in there. And I'm going to do 2. Open parentheses plus 4. What's going to go inside that parentheses? Well, the 0, right? Because that's my input or my x. So now I'm going to evaluate this. So what's 2 times 0? Well, that's just 0. And 0 plus 4 is 4. So that's it. I'm done for that one. And you guys can do the 3 and the 10, okay? Let me know what you guys get. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 2. All right, so for number 2, we have f of x is equal to -5x plus 2. And they want me to find the domains, right? So, or I'm sorry, not the domain, but they want us to evaluate the function using the domain. So using the x values. So we're going to go ahead and do f. And instead of putting the x, everywhere I see the x, I'm just going to put parentheses because that's where our input is going to go, right? Now let's do the first one. Well, it's -3. What's going to go inside of here? -3. And in here, -3 as well. So let's evaluate this. What is -5 times -3? Well, that is 15, positive 15. What is 15 plus 2? That's going to be 17. So that's it. I'm done. I put inside my input, inside the parentheses, I put my input. And I was able to get what f of -3 was. Now let's go ahead and move on to the second one, which is -2. Remember, these are all my domains. These are all my inputs, all of my x's, okay? That means that I'm not going to put x anymore here or here. The x's are being replaced. We know what the x's are now. So now I'm going to do f of -2 is equal to -5. and then parentheses plus 2. What's going to go inside of that parentheses? It's not going to be x anymore, or it is going to be x, but I know what my value of x is, so it's going to be negative 2. Now, I'm going to go ahead and evaluate this. What is negative 5 times negative 2? Well, that's going to be positive 10. And what is 10 plus 2? Well, that's 12. And let's do 0. 0 is going to be f of 0 is equal to negative 5 parentheses plus 2. What's going to go inside of that parentheses? Well, what's my input? The 0, right? So that's what's going to go inside of there. Think about input inside parentheses, okay? So f of 0 is equal to, what's negative 5 times 0? Well, that's just 0. And 0 plus 2 is 2. And then you guys can go ahead and practice evaluating when x is equal to 3 and when x is equal to 10. All right. All right. For number 3, we have that f of x is equal to negative 1/2 x minus 6. So again, my domain is my x. And in other words, the x is the input. Okay. So think about it like this. Anytime you see like in parentheses, think about input, okay? In parentheses, input. So I have my first one, which is negative 3. So instead of putting this x right here and this x right here, I'm going to put parentheses because I'm not going to put x anymore. I'm going to put the values of x that they're giving me. So put parentheses here again, minus 6. So what is the x value that I'm going to put in? Well, it's going to be that negative 3. So negative 3 and negative 3 here. So now I can go ahead and evaluate this. What is negative 1/2 times negative 3? Well, that's going to be positive 3 over 2. And then minus 6. And I don't have a calculator, so I'm going to go ahead and do it by hand. So multiply by 2 on the top and bottom. So I get that f of negative 3 is equal to 3 minus 12 over 2. And 3 minus 12 is going to be negative 9 over 2. And so, yeah, that's my answer right there for that one. You didn't have to do all of this. If you had a calculator, you could have done it that way, but I didn't, so that's why I did it like that. Now, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and do the last 2 because I've been doing the first 3. So you can go ahead and practice this negative 2 and the 0, and I'm going to go ahead and skip over to 3 and 10, all right? So let's go ahead and start with 3. So they give me that my x is going to be 3 for this one. So I have right here, let me get my pen ready. So instead of putting x, I'm going to put parentheses and I'm going to leave it blank, okay? Because that's where my input is going to be. What is my input? Well, for this case, it's going to be 3. So 3 is going to go in here and 3 is going to go in here. Now I can go ahead and evaluate this. So what is negative 1/2 times 3? Well, that's just going to be negative 3 over 2. And then bring down the minus 6. What is negative 3 over 2 minus 6? Well, again, I don't have a calculator, so I'm going to do it by hand. But if you have a calculator, feel free to skip over this. So I have f of 3 is equal to negative 3 minus 12 over 2. And then negative 3 minus 12, well, that's just negative 15 over 2. And so that would be it for that one. Now, for the last one is 10, right? So the last thing that I'm evaluating is 10. That's my last input. So I'm going to do it over here on this side. I have f of x, and I'm going to leave the x blank because I'm going to use my input in a minute. Negative 1/2, put parentheses around that. minus 6. So what is going to go inside of here? Well, I said my input in this case is going to be 10. So 10 here and 10 here. So I have f of 10 is equal to negative 1/2 times 10. Well, that's just going to be negative 10 over 2. But what is negative 10 divided by 2? Well, that's negative 5. And what is negative 5 minus 6? Well, that's negative 11. So that's it. I'm done for that one. And that's it for that. If you have any questions on this, please be sure to let us know. All right. Moving on to the next part. It says solve for x given the range. So now they give us the range. What is range? That is y, right? So we have to find x and they give us y. Well, what do we say y was? Remember, f of x is equal to y. So they give us this part and we need to find this x right here. So let's go ahead and evaluate the first range that they give us, the first y. So instead of putting f of x, I'm not going to put f of x anymore. I'm going to put this negative 3. So negative 3 is equal to 1 over 4 x. I had to solve for x. I'm going to put a box around that x because I'm not going to move that x. That x is going to stay there. What is the opposite of dividing? Remember, whenever we see fractions, that's the same thing as dividing. So what is the opposite of dividing? Well, it's going to be multiplying. And what am I going to multiply? If you guys remember, that word is called a reciprocal. And the reciprocal is whenever you flip the fraction. So I'm going to multiply by 4 over 1 on both sides. So this reduces to 1, and this reduces to 1. And 4 over 1 times negative 3, well, that's just negative 12 is equal to x. So I found my x for whenever my output is negative 3. Also, I forgot to mention, y or range is output. Okay? So the x is my input, the y is my output. All right, now let's go ahead and evaluate the 1. So instead of putting f of x, I'm going to put 1 because that's my y. And f of x is the same thing as y, right? So then 1 over 4x. Put a box around your x because that's not going to be moved. And what are we going to multiply by? Well, we're going to go ahead and multiply it by 4 over 1. Again, because we're trying to do the opposite of division. And whenever we have a fraction, that's the same thing as division. So then this reduces to 1. And then you have to multiply on this side as well. So 4 over 1. What is 4 over 1 times 1? Well, that's just going to be 4. So x is equal to 4. And we're done for that one. Now for 0, excuse me. For 0, this is our next one. Instead of putting f of x, what am I going to put, guys? Remember, f of x is equal to what? Is equal to y, right? And this is my range. All of these are my ranges. So that means that I know what my f of x is. I know what my y is. So I'm going to do 0 is equal to 1 over 4x. Put a box around that x and multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. That reduces to 1, and I do 4 over 1 here. But 4 over 1 times 0, well, that's just 0. So x is equal to 0 in this case. And I'm going to go ahead and let you guys practice 4 and 8, all right? Please be sure to practice because if you don't understand this, you're only going to learn by doing. All right, so for this one, for number 2, we have f of x is equal to 15 minus x. All right. So it says solve for x given the range. So they give us the range. Again, the range is the y. And our y is the same thing as f of x. So we have to use the information that they're giving us. We're going to first do the one that's negative 3, all right? So first, let's do that one that's negative 3. Instead of putting the f of x, well, I already know what my f of x is, right? We said the f of x is this right here because that's my y, that's my range. So I'm not going to put f of x. I'm going to replace that with negative 3. is equal to 15 minus x. They want me to solve for x, so I'm going to put a box around that x because that's not to be moved. Everything else will be moved, but the x will not be moved. And actually, let me put a box around, yeah, like that. Sorry. All right, so that means I have to move that 15 to the other side. Well, what is the opposite of positive 15? Well, minus 15 on both sides. Negative 3 minus 15, well, that is negative 18, is equal to negative x. Put a box around that x. Now, I have a negative there. Whenever you have like a negative or just like not a number in front of a variable, in this case being x, we know that it's going to be an invisible 1. So there's actually a 1 in there. So I'm going to write that down. There is a 1 there. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the opposite operation that's being taken here. This is negative 1 times x. So what is the opposite of multiplication? Well, it's going to be division. So I'm going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. And negative 18 divided by negative 1, well, that's just positive 18. And negative 1 divided by negative 1, well, that reduced to 1. And I'm left with my x. So x is equal to 18. All right, and I'm done there. Now let's do the same thing for 1. So again, my f of x is my output. The same thing as y. All right, the same thing as range. So instead of putting f of x, I'm going to rewrite that as 1 is equal to 15 minus x. Put a box around your x because that's where you're solving for, and then move everything to the other side. So I'm going to do minus 15 on both sides. 1 minus 15, well, that's negative 14, and we have negative x. Remember what I said about the invisible 1? We have an invisible 1 right here, and we're going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. Negative 14 divided by negative 1, well, that's just positive 14. So we get positive 14 is equal to x, and we found our x. All right. So for 0, that's pretty easy. We're gonna go ahead and try it. So instead of writing f of x, I'm gonna write down 0 because that's my y value, right? That's my output. So 0 is equal to 15 minus x. Now I'm gonna subtract by 15 on both sides. 0 minus 15, well, that's negative 15. This reduced to 0 here. Oh, I forgot to put a box around my x. Sorry, guys. So I have negative x right here. And I still have the box around it. Remember, what did I say about that negative in front of the x? That's negative 1, right? Negative, let me do a different color. Negative 1. So we're going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. Negative 15 divided by negative 1, well, that's positive 15. And this reduced to 1. So we have our x by itself, and this is our answer. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys do the 4, this 4 and the 8 by yourself, okay? So you can get that extra practice. If you don't understand this, please be sure to ask your teachers. All right, last problem, guys. So I went ahead and wrote down the ranges just because I don't want to have to be going up and down. So I just want to rewrite it. All right, anyways, so they want us to find the values of x, and they give us all of these ranges, right? In other words, they give all of these y values. So again, the f of x is equal to y, all right? And y is equal to range. And range is the same thing as the output. So all of these things mean the same thing, guys, all right? So usually I would rewrite everything in this equation, but I know what f of x is, so I'm not going to rewrite that. They want us to do it for the first one, for all of these values actually. But since I already did the first 3, I'm going to go ahead and do the last 2, number 4 and number 8. So instead of, let's start with number 4. So instead of writing f of x, I'm going to put 4. because that's my y value, right, is equal to negative x plus 2. And they want us to solve for x, so I'm going to put a box around that x because that's not going to be moved. So now I can go ahead and move this positive 2 to the other side by doing the opposite, which is minus 2 on both sides. So 4 minus 2 is 2, and I have negative x. Now, what's in front of that negative? Remember, if you can't see it, that's a 1. Now, negative 1 times x, well, what's the opposite? Dividing. Divide by negative 1 on both sides. That reduces to 1. And 2 divided by negative 1, well, that's just negative 2. So x is equal to 2. I found my x. Now, let's go ahead and do the same thing for this number right here, number 8. So again, I'm not going to write down f of x. I'm going to write down what my y value is, because my y value is the same thing as the f of x, or the output. So I'm going to do 8 is equal to negative x plus 2. Put a box around your x because that's what we're solving for, and that is what's not going to be moved. So now I do the opposite of positive 2, and that's negative 2. 8 minus 2, well, that's just going to be 6, and I have my negative x. And what's in front of that negative? It's a 1, right? So I'm going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. 6 divided by negative 1, well, that's just negative 6. And this reduced to 1, so I'm left with my x by itself, which is what I wanted. And so I'm done. All right, that was it for these notes, guys. If you guys have any questions, please be sure to ask your teachers.